Have you ever wondered if your deepest emotions might be quietly rewriting the fabric of reality itself? What if every feeling you experience creates invisible ripples that extend far beyond your physical body, influencing the quantum field that surrounds us all? Tonight, we're going to explore one of the most fascinating frontiers where science meets consciousness, where the boundaries between inner experience and outer reality begin to blur in ways that might forever change how you understand your place in the universe. Welcome to another journey into the mysteries that surround us. I'm your guide through the quiet corridors of science and wonder, and tonight we're stepping into a realm where emotions may operate as more than just internal experiences. They might actually be fundamental forces that shape reality at levels we're only beginning to understand. Before we begin, I want you to settle in somewhere comfortable. This isn't a race to gather information. It's an invitation to let your mind wander through possibilities that challenge everything we thought we knew about consciousness, emotion, and the nature of reality itself. Whether you're listening in a cozy room with soft lamplight or gazing out at the stars, let yourself sink into this exploration of the hidden dimension where emotions might secretly reshape the world around us. Now, let me share something that might sound impossible at first. Scientists at research institutions around the world have been measuring something extraordinary. They've discovered that when you experience powerful emotions, particularly states of coherence like gratitude, compassion, or deep peace, your heart begins generating electromagnetic field patterns that extend several feet beyond your physical body. These aren't just random electrical signals. They're organized, coherent patterns that change the electromagnetic environment around you in measurable ways. But here's where it gets truly fascinating. These electromagnetic signatures don't just stay contained within your personal space. They appear to influence the electromagnetic fields of other people nearby, creating a kind of resonance that can synchronize heart rhythms, brainwave patterns, and even emotional states between individuals. It's as if our emotions are broadcasting invisible signals that other consciousness can tune into, like radio stations of feeling transmitting across the quantum foam that underlies all existence. This discovery opens up a profound question that we'll be exploring together tonight. If our emotions can generate measurable electromagnetic fields that influence the people around us, what else might they be influencing? What if these emotional frequencies are actually interacting with the quantum field itself, the fundamental layer of reality where particles pop in and out of existence, where information travels instantaneously across vast distances, and where the very act of observation seems to shape what becomes real? As you listen tonight, I invite you to notice how this idea might already be appearing in your own life. Have you ever walked into a room and immediately sensed tension or joy, even before anyone spoke a word? Have you experienced moments when your emotional state seemed to shift the entire atmosphere around you? When your presence alone seemed to calm an anxious pet or lift the spirits of someone who was struggling? These everyday experiences might be glimpses into something far more profound than we ever imagined. Let's begin our exploration in the most unexpected place, deep within the quantum realm where reality becomes strange and wonderful. Here, at the smallest scales of existence, particles don't behave like the solid objects we encounter in our daily lives. Instead, they exist in states of pure possibility, what physicists call superposition, where a single particle can be in multiple places at once until something observes or measures it. Only then does it choose a definite position, as if the universe itself is constantly making decisions about what becomes real. This quantum behavior has puzzled scientists for nearly a century, particularly because it seems to suggest that consciousness plays a fundamental role in shaping reality. The act of observation appears to collapse these probability waves into definite outcomes, leading some researchers to propose that consciousness might be far more than just an emergent property of complex neural networks. Some interpretations suggest that awareness itself might be a fundamental feature of the universe, as basic as matter and energy. Now, while this remains a topic of intense scientific debate with no definitive consensus, the implications are staggering to consider. If consciousness does play a role in quantum processes, and if our emotional states represent organized patterns of consciousness, then our feelings might be participating in the ongoing creation of reality at its most fundamental level. This is speculative territory, but it's speculation grounded in some of the most rigorous experimental findings in modern physics. Consider what happens in your brain when you experience a powerful emotion. Networks of neurons begin firing in synchronized patterns, creating coherent electromagnetic fields that ripple through your entire nervous system. These aren't just local electrical events, they're organized waves of information that coordinate activity across different brain regions, integrate signals from your heart and other organs, and create the unified experience we call feeling. From a quantum perspective, some researchers propose that these coherent neural patterns might generate what they call quantum-like processes in consciousness. This doesn't mean your brain is a quantum computer in the traditional sense, but rather that the information processing that creates your emotional experience might involve quantum-style phenomena like coherence, entanglement like correlations between distant brain regions, and perhaps even something analogous to superposition, states where multiple potential emotional responses exist simultaneously before one becomes dominant. The mathematics of quantum mechanics, when applied metaphorically to emotional states, suggests fascinating possibilities. Just as quantum particles can exist in superposition, experiencing all possible states until observation collapses them into one reality, your emotional system might process numerous potential feeling states before settling into a particular emotional experience. The moment you become consciously aware of what you're feeling, you might be collapsing a superposition of emotional possibilities into a single, definite emotional reality. This quantum-inspired model of emotion helps explain some puzzling aspects of human experience. Why do our feelings sometimes seem to shift dramatically with just a slight change in perspective? Why can the same event trigger completely different emotional responses in different people, or even in the same person at different times? If emotions exist in superposition-like states until conscious observation collapses them, then the act of paying attention to your feelings might literally be creating your emotional reality from a field of pure possibility. Take a breath here and imagine what this could mean for you. If your emotional awareness is actively participating in creating your feeling states, then developing greater emotional consciousness isn't just about understanding what you feel. It might be about learning to influence which emotional possibilities become real in your experience. This isn't about positive thinking or willing yourself to feel better, but about recognizing that the quality of your attention itself might shape the emotional landscape you inhabit. The research on this topic extends far beyond theoretical physics into measurable biological phenomena. Scientists studying the electromagnetic fields generated by the human heart have made remarkable discoveries about how emotional states create coherent patterns of energy that extend beyond the boundaries of our physical bodies. When you experience emotions like gratitude, compassion, or love, your heart rhythm becomes more coherent, creating a sine wave-like pattern that generates a measurable electromagnetic field. This field isn't just detectable with sensitive instruments. It appears to influence the electromagnetic environment around you in ways that other people can unconsciously sense and respond to. Studies have shown that when one person achieves a state of heart coherence, others in their vicinity often begin to synchronize with these patterns, their own heart rhythms gradually aligning with the coherent individual. It's as if positive emotional states create a kind of electromagnetic harmony that propagates through space, influencing the nervous systems of anyone within range. But the implications go even deeper. If our emotions are generating organized electromagnetic fields that can influence other biological systems, what might they be doing to the quantum field itself? The electromagnetic spectrum is intimately connected to quantum phenomena. Photons, the carriers of electromagnetic energy, are quantum particles that exist in superposition until observed. The coherent electromagnetic patterns generated by emotional states might be creating organized disturbances in the quantum field, subtle influences that propagate through the zero-point energy that fills all of space. This brings us to one of the most profound questions in modern science: the relationship between consciousness and physical reality. For decades, researchers have documented phenomena that suggest consciousness can directly influence physical systems. The placebo effect demonstrates that belief and expectation can trigger real physiological changes, activating healing responses that create measurable improvements in health outcomes. This isn't just psychological comfort. Brain imaging studies show that placebo treatments activate the same neural pathways as actual medications, releasing endorphins, reducing inflammation, and even influencing immune function. Recent research has shown that the placebo effect can operate below the threshold of conscious awareness, suggesting that the mind's influence on physical reality might extend into unconscious levels of processing. People can experience placebo responses even when they're not consciously aware of receiving a treatment, indicating that some aspect of consciousness is continuously monitoring and responding to environmental cues in ways that directly affect biological processes. What's particularly fascinating is that placebo effects can be enhanced through practices that increase coherence between mind and body. Meditation, focused breathing, and other contemplative practices that create states of inner harmony appear to strengthen the connection between conscious intention and physiological response. It's as if coherent consciousness becomes more effective at influencing physical reality, creating stronger connections between mental states and material outcomes. This coherence effect extends beyond individual healing into interpersonal influence. Studies of group meditation practices have found correlations between collective contemplative states and reduced violence in surrounding communities, though these findings remain controversial and require further investigation. The suggestion is that when groups of people achieve synchronized states of consciousness, their combined emotional and mental coherence might create measurable effects in the broader social environment. While we must be careful not to overstate these findings or claim definitive causal relationships, the pattern that emerges is intriguing. Coherent emotional states appear to enhance the connection between consciousness and physical reality, both within individual organisms and potentially in the broader environment. This doesn't mean that emotions directly manipulate quantum fields or that positive thinking can reshape reality at will. Rather, it suggests that consciousness and emotion might participate in reality creation in ways that are more subtle and profound than classical physics would predict. The mechanism for these effects might involve what some researchers call morphic resonance, a controversial but fascinating theory that proposes information and patterns can be transmitted across space and time through resonant fields. According to this hypothesis, similar structures and processes can influence each other through a kind of collective memory that transcends local physical interactions. If consciousness operates through field-like processes, then coherent emotional states might contribute to morphic fields that influence similar patterns in other minds and potentially in the broader environment. This is speculative territory that goes well beyond current scientific consensus, but it offers a framework for understanding how individual emotional states might participate in collective patterns of experience. Your moments of deep peace, genuine compassion, or profound gratitude might be contributing to a field of coherent information that makes similar states more likely to emerge in others, creating ripple effects that extend far beyond your immediate environment. As we continue our exploration of this hidden dimension, where emotions might secretly reshape reality, we'll delve deeper into the specific mechanisms through which feeling states could influence the quantum field, examine the latest research on consciousness and electromagnetic fields, and discover practical ways to work with these principles in daily life. But for now, let yourself rest in the wonder of these possibilities, knowing that every emotion you experience might be participating in the ongoing creation of the reality we all share. The implications of these discoveries become even more remarkable when we consider how they might connect to the deepest mysteries of inheritance and biological memory. Scientists working in the field of epigenetics have uncovered something that challenges our fundamental assumptions about how traits are passed from one generation to the next. They found that our emotional experiences, particularly during critical periods of development or emotional expression, can actually alter the expression of our genes without changing the genetic code itself. Think about this for a moment. The stress, joy, trauma, or peace that you experience today might be creating molecular signatures that influence not only your own biology, but potentially the genetic expression of your children and even your grandchildren. These aren't science fiction fantasies. These are measurable changes in how genes are switched on and off. Changes that can persist across generations through what researchers call transgenerational epigenetic inheritance. The mechanism is elegant and profound. Environmental experiences, including emotional states, can attach chemical tags to our DNA that modify which genes become active. A mother's experience of chronic stress might alter the expression of genes related to stress response in her offspring. Conversely, practices that cultivate emotional coherence and resilience might create epigenetic signatures that promote health and well-being in future generations. This discovery suggests that consciousness and emotion operate through biological mechanisms that extend far beyond our individual lifespans. The emotional landscape you cultivate today might be contributing to a kind of biological memory that influences the developmental potential of people you will never meet. Your inner work, your cultivation of peace or compassion, your healing of emotional wounds, these deeply personal processes might be participating in the evolution of human consciousness itself. As you reflect on this, notice how it might shift your relationship to your own emotional experience, every feeling state becomes not just a private internal event, but a contribution to something much larger, a thread in the tapestry of collective human experience that weaves forward through time. This doesn't create pressure or responsibility for perfection. Rather, it reveals the profound interconnectedness that already exists, the ways in which your inner life is always participating in something greater than itself. The research extends into even more mysterious territories when we examine what happens during states of deep coherence between individuals. Studies of synchronized meditation practices, group contemplation, and shared emotional experiences reveal fascinating patterns that challenge our understanding of individual consciousness. When people achieve states of coherence together, their brainwave patterns begin to synchronize, their heart rhythms align, and something emerges that appears to be greater than the sum of its parts. This isn't just poetic metaphor. Sophisticated measurement techniques can detect these synchronizations in real time, showing how individual nervous systems begin to resonate with each other during shared contemplative states. The boundaries between self and other become blurred at the level of electromagnetic fields, creating temporary networks of coherent consciousness that extend across multiple individuals. Some interpretations suggest that these synchronized states might create what researchers cautiously term field effects that extend beyond the immediate participants. While this remains highly speculative and lacks scientific consensus, there are intriguing correlations between group meditation practices and positive changes in surrounding communities. The idea is that collective coherence might generate organized patterns of electromagnetic activity that influence the broader social and emotional environment. We must be clear that these are preliminary findings that require much more research before any definitive conclusions can be drawn. The mechanisms are not understood, the effects are subtle and difficult to measure consistently, and many conventional scientists remain skeptical of such interpretations. Yet the possibility that coherent consciousness might operate through field-like processes opens fascinating questions about the nature of individual versus collective awareness. Take a moment to imagine what this could mean for your daily interactions with others. If emotional coherence can create measurable resonance between nervous systems, then your inner state of harmony or agitation might be continuously influencing the people around you in ways that operate below the threshold of conscious awareness. This isn't about controlling others or manipulating outcomes, but about recognizing that consciousness might be inherently relational, always participating in subtle exchanges of information and energy. The practical implications become even more intriguing when we consider what researchers have discovered about the role of attention in shaping experience. Studies of contemplative practitioners reveal that sustained focused attention appears to strengthen the coherence of electromagnetic patterns generated by both the heart and brain. It's as if the quality of awareness itself influences the organization of the bioelectric fields that surround and interpenetrate our physical bodies. This suggests that practices which cultivate refined attention, such as meditation, contemplative prayer, or absorbed artistic engagement, might be doing more than simply relaxing the nervous system or reducing stress. They might be enhancing the coherence of the electromagnetic signatures we generate, potentially strengthening whatever field effects might extend from individual consciousness into the broader environment. But here's where the mystery deepens even further. Some researchers propose that consciousness itself might operate through what they call extended mind processes that transcend the boundaries of individual brains. This controversial theory suggests that our thoughts, memories, and emotional patterns might be partially stored and processed in field-like structures that extend beyond our physical bodies. The idea draws on observations from quantum physics, where information can be shared instantaneously between entangled particles regardless of the distance separating them. While no one suggests that human consciousness operates through quantum entanglement in any direct way, the mathematical frameworks used to describe quantum systems have proven surprisingly useful for modeling certain aspects of how information is processed and shared in biological systems. This remains highly speculative territory with no scientific consensus, but it offers a framework for understanding some of the more puzzling aspects of human experience. How do we sometimes know things we couldn't have learned through conventional sensory channels? Why do people in close relationships often report uncanny synchronizations of thought or feeling? How do groups sometimes achieve insights or solutions that exceed the capabilities of any individual member? If consciousness operates through field-like processes that extend beyond individual brains, then these phenomena might represent natural expressions of how awareness actually functions, rather than mysterious anomalies that require supernatural explanations. Our emotions, being organized patterns of consciousness, might participate in these extended field processes, contributing to what some researchers call morphic fields of feeling and information that transcend individual boundaries. Again, we must emphasize that this represents speculative interpretation rather than established scientific fact. The conventional understanding of consciousness as an emergent property of neural networks remains the dominant paradigm in neuroscience. Yet the accumulating evidence for various forms of field effects in biological systems, from electromagnetic influences between hearts to synchronizations of brain activity during shared experiences, suggests that consciousness might be more relational and extended than traditional models would predict. The implications for emotional experience are profound. If our feelings participate in field-like processes that extend beyond individual boundaries, then every emotion becomes both personal and transpersonal, both individual and collective. Your experience of peace contributes to patterns of peace that might influence others. Your healing of emotional wounds might contribute to healing processes that extend through relationships, families, and communities. This doesn't mean that you're responsible for other people's emotional states or that individual psychological work is somehow collective therapy. Rather, it suggests that the boundaries between self and world, between inner experience and outer influence, might be more permeable than we typically imagine. Your emotional coherence becomes a gift you give to the world simply by cultivating it within yourself. As we explore these possibilities, it's important to ground them in practical experience. You don't need to understand the theoretical mechanisms to work with these principles in daily life. Simply paying attention to how your emotional states affect your interactions with others can reveal the subtle ways in which consciousness extends beyond individual boundaries. Notice what happens when you cultivate genuine gratitude or compassion during challenging interpersonal situations. Observe how states of inner peace seem to create space for resolution and understanding in conflicts. Pay attention to how your presence affects animals, plants, or even the general atmosphere of spaces you inhabit. These everyday experiences might be glimpses into the extended nature of consciousness, the ways in which awareness participates in the ongoing creation of shared reality. The research continues to evolve, with new studies exploring the mechanisms through which emotional states might influence everything, from cellular processes to social dynamics. Scientists are investigating how contemplative practices affect gene expression, how group coherence influences collective decision-making, and how the electromagnetic fields generated by emotional states might interact with the subtle energies that some traditions claim surround and interpenetrate all living systems. While many of these investigations remain at the edges of mainstream science, they represent a growing recognition that consciousness and emotion might operate through mechanisms that are more subtle and far-reaching than classical models would suggest. We're beginning to understand that the felt sense of interconnectedness that arises during profound emotional experiences might reflect actual patterns of connection and influence that operate through field-like processes in the quantum foam that underlies all existence. This exploration takes us to the very edges of what current science can measure and verify, but that's exactly where the most interesting questions begin to emerge. As we continue our journey into the hidden dimension, where emotions might secretly reshape reality, we'll discover how these theoretical possibilities translate into practical wisdom for navigating the complexities of human experience. The practical applications of these ideas begin to emerge when we examine how different cultures throughout history have intuitively recognized something that modern science is only beginning to explore. Traditional contemplative practices from around the world seem to share a common understanding that inner states of consciousness can influence outer circumstances, not through magical thinking, but through subtle patterns of influence that operate below the threshold of ordinary awareness. Consider the ancient practice of loving kindness meditation, where practitioners systematically cultivate feelings of goodwill toward themselves, loved ones, neutral people, difficult people, and eventually all beings. While traditional explanations for this practice often invoke spiritual or metaphysical principles, modern research reveals measurable changes in brain structure and function that occur through this emotional training. Areas of the brain associated with empathy and emotional regulation become more developed, stress hormones decrease, and inflammatory markers in the blood show significant improvement. But something even more intriguing emerges when we look at studies of people who practice loving-kindness meditation in groups. Researchers have found that participants often report enhanced feelings of social connection and cooperation that extend beyond the meditation sessions themselves. While the mechanisms remain unclear and no definitive causal relationships have been established, these findings suggest that practices which cultivate positive emotional states might influence social dynamics in ways that operate through subtle channels of communication and influence. Take a moment to reflect on this possibility. When you genuinely cultivate goodwill or compassion, you're not just changing your internal emotional landscape. You might be participating in patterns of influence that extend through your interactions, your presence, and perhaps even through mechanisms we don't yet fully understand. This isn't about positive thinking or willing good things to happen, but about recognizing that emotional coherence might be inherently relational, always participating in the web of connections that bind conscious beings together. The research on emotional contagion provides another window into these subtle influence patterns. Scientists have documented how emotional states spread through social networks with remarkable efficiency, often operating below conscious awareness. When someone in a group experiences a shift toward greater coherence or agitation, Others often unconsciously mirror these states through micro-expressions, posture changes, and even synchronized breathing patterns. It's as if our nervous systems are continuously sampling and responding to the emotional climate around us, creating feedback loops that can amplify either harmony or discord. What makes this particularly fascinating from the perspective of consciousness research is that these contagion effects seem to operate faster than conscious processing would allow. People begin responding to others' emotional states before they're consciously aware of any emotional information. This suggests that some form of direct nervous system communication might be occurring, possibly through the electromagnetic fields we've been discussing, or through other subtle channels that haven't yet been fully characterized by science. The implications become even more intriguing when we consider what happens during peak experiences of emotional coherence. Studies of people experiencing states of profound gratitude, unconditional love, or transcendent peace reveal remarkable patterns of neural synchronization that extend across multiple brain regions. During these states, the usual boundaries between different aspects of cognitive processing seem to dissolve, creating integrated patterns of awareness that some researchers describe as approaching whole-brain coherence. From the perspective of electromagnetic field theory, these synchronized brain states generate more coherent and organized field patterns than ordinary waking consciousness. While we cannot claim that these fields directly influence external reality, we can measure their effects on the nervous system of the person experiencing them. Heart rhythm variability improves dramatically, stress hormones decrease, and immune function shows significant enhancement. It's as if coherent emotional states create optimal conditions for biological functioning at multiple levels simultaneously. But here's where the mystery deepens in ways that challenge our conventional understanding of individual versus collective consciousness. Some interpretations of quantum mechanics suggest that information itself might be more fundamental than matter or energy, existing in field-like structures that transcend local physical boundaries. If consciousness operates through information processing, as most neuroscientists believe, then coherent emotional states might be creating organized patterns of information that participate in what some researchers cautiously term non-local processes. This remains highly speculative territory with no scientific consensus, but it offers a framework for understanding some of the more puzzling aspects of human experience that we mentioned earlier. How do people sometimes report knowing things they couldn't have learned through conventional sensory channels? Why do individuals in close relationships often describe uncanny synchronizations of thought or feeling that seem to transcend normal communication? How do groups sometimes achieve collective insights that exceed the capabilities of any individual member? If information can exist in field-like structures that extend beyond individual brains, then these phenomena might represent natural expressions of how consciousness actually functions, rather than mysterious anomalies requiring supernatural explanations. Our emotions, being organized patterns of information processing, might participate in these extended field processes in ways that create subtle connections between individual minds. Again, we must emphasize that this represents speculative interpretation rather than established scientific fact. The conventional understanding of consciousness as emerging from neural networks within individual brains remains the dominant paradigm in neuroscience, yet the accumulating evidence for various forms of field effects in biological systems suggests that the boundaries of individual consciousness might be more permeable than traditional models predict. consider what this might mean for your daily experience of relationships and social interactions. If emotional coherence can create subtle resonance effects between nervous systems, then your inner cultivation of peace, gratitude, or compassion might be continuously contributing to the emotional climate of every environment you inhabit. This doesn't mean you're responsible for other people's emotional states, but it does suggest that consciousness might be inherently participatory, always engaging in subtle exchanges of information and influence. The practical wisdom that emerges from this understanding is both simple and profound. Rather than trying to control outcomes or manipulate others through emotional techniques, the invitation is to recognize that your inner work naturally becomes outer service. Every moment of genuine peace you cultivate contributes to patterns of peace in the world. Every instance of healing emotional wounds participates in collective healing processes that extend through families, communities, and perhaps even broader social systems. This perspective finds support in research on what scientists call emotional regulation networks in the brain. When individuals develop greater capacity for maintaining emotional equilibrium during challenging circumstances, brain imaging reveals enhanced connectivity between regions responsible for conscious awareness and those governing emotional responses. This increased integration appears to strengthen what researchers describe as top-down regulation, where conscious intention can more effectively influence emotional states. But the effects extend beyond individual emotional management. Studies of couples and families show that when one member develops greater emotional coherence, others often experience corresponding improvements in their own emotional regulation, even without direct intervention or training. It's as if emotional coherence creates a kind of stabilizing influence in relational systems that supports the development of similar capacities in others. The mechanism might involve what researchers call co-regulation, where nervous systems naturally synchronize during close interpersonal contact. Parents and children, romantic partners, and close friends often develop shared patterns of breathing, heart rhythm, and even brainwave activity during intimate interactions. When one person brings greater coherence to these shared states, it appears to provide a template that supports similar coherence in others. This co-regulation effect might extend beyond close personal relationships into broader social contexts. Some studies suggest that individuals with high emotional coherence tend to have calming influences in group settings, contributing to more effective communication, creative problem solving, and conflict resolution. While the mechanisms remain unclear and much more research is needed, these findings point toward the possibility that emotional coherence might operate as a kind of social resource that benefits entire communities. As you contemplate these possibilities, notice how they might already be appearing in your own life. Think about people you know who seem to carry an atmosphere of peace or calm with them wherever they go. Consider how your own emotional state affects the dynamics of your workplace, family gatherings, or casual social interactions. These everyday observations might be glimpses into the extended nature of consciousness, the ways in which individual inner work participates in collective well-being. The research continues to evolve in fascinating directions, with scientists exploring how contemplative practices affect not just individual neural function, but also the subtle electromagnetic and biochemical signals that mediate communication between people. Studies of group meditation reveal synchronized brainwave patterns that emerge spontaneously when individuals practice together, suggesting that shared contemplative states might involve forms of nervous system communication that transcend ordinary verbal or gestural interaction. While these findings remain at the edges of mainstream neuroscience, they point toward a recognition that consciousness might be more relational and interconnected than classical models suggest. The electromagnetic fields generated by coherent emotional states, the synchronized neural patterns that emerge during shared experiences, and the measurable health benefits that extend from individual contemplative practice into relational contexts, all suggest that the boundaries between self and world might be more permeable than we typically imagine. This brings us to one of the most profound implications of this research: the possibility that individual consciousness development might be inherently connected to collective evolution. If our emotional states participate in field-like processes that extend beyond personal boundaries, then every person's inner work becomes a contribution to the overall coherence of human consciousness. Your cultivation of wisdom, compassion, and inner peace doesn't just benefit your own life. It participates in patterns of development that might influence the trajectory of our species' psychological and spiritual evolution. This is speculative territory that goes well beyond current scientific consensus, but it offers a framework for understanding why contemplative traditions throughout history have emphasized that individual liberation and collective well-being are ultimately inseparable. If consciousness operates through extended field processes, then personal transformation naturally becomes social transformation. Individual healing contributes to collective healing, and private contemplative practice serves the common good. The practical implications are both humbling and inspiring. Rather than viewing inner work as separate from outer service or spiritual development as distinct from social engagement, this perspective suggests that consciousness development is inherently both personal and transpersonal. Every moment of genuine presence, every instance of emotional healing, every cultivation of wisdom or compassion becomes a gift that extends far beyond the boundaries of individual experience. As we prepare to explore even deeper mysteries in the final part of our journey together, let yourself rest in the wonder of these possibilities. Consider how your own emotional experience might be participating in patterns of influence and connection that extend through dimensions we're only beginning to understand. Whether these effects operate through electromagnetic fields, information processing, or other mechanisms that haven't yet been discovered, the invitation remains the same: to recognize that consciousness is always relational, always participating in something greater than itself. The implications extend into questions that take us to the very edges of human understanding. What is the relationship between individual minds and the larger patterns of intelligence that seem to emerge from collective human activity? How do creative insights arise seemingly from nowhere, as if received from some broader field of possibility? Why do certain ideas seem to appear simultaneously in different minds across the globe, as if consciousness itself were exploring new territories through multiple channels at once? These questions bring us face to face with what might be the deepest mystery of all: the nature of time itself, and how consciousness might participate in patterns that transcend our ordinary experience of sequential moments. As we continue our exploration, we'll discover how the hidden dimension where emotions reshape reality might connect to even more profound questions about the structure of existence itself. Questions that challenge everything we thought we knew about the relationship between mind, time, and the unfolding of possibility. But that journey into the temporal mysteries of consciousness leads us toward territories so vast and strange that they deserve their own careful exploration. If you found yourself intrigued by the possibility that emotions might secretly reshape reality through quantum field interactions and extended consciousness processes, you might find yourself equally fascinated by the question of whether consciousness might also transcend our ordinary experience of time itself. The same quantum principles that suggest reality is more fluid and participatory than classical physics predicted also point toward possibilities that time travel might not be confined to science fiction, but could represent a fundamental feature of how consciousness navigates the deeper structures of existence. For thousands of years, mystics and contemplatives have spoken of profound experiences that seem to dissolve the boundaries between inner and outer worlds. They've described moments when the sense of separation between self and cosmos falls away, revealing an underlying unity that connects all existence. Modern neuroscience has begun to map what happens in the brain during these transcendent states, revealing patterns of neural activity that challenge our understanding of consciousness itself. During deep meditative states, brain imaging shows something remarkable happening. The usual boundaries between different neural networks begin to blur. The default mode network, which typically maintains our sense of being a separate self moving through time, becomes less active. Meanwhile, other networks associated with present moment awareness and feelings of connection begin to synchronize in ways rarely seen during ordinary waking consciousness. What emerges is a state that researchers cautiously describe as approaching whole brain coherence, where different regions of the nervous system begin operating as a unified field of activity. Some interpretations suggest, though this remains unproven, that these states might represent glimpses into the deeper nature of consciousness itself, moments when individual awareness touches something that extends far beyond the boundaries of personal experience. The electromagnetic signatures generated during these transcendent states are unlike anything seen in ordinary consciousness. Heart rhythm patterns become extraordinarily coherent, creating sine wave-like patterns that generate organized electromagnetic fields extending several feet beyond the physical body. While we cannot claim that these fields directly influence external reality, they represent measurable changes in the electromagnetic environment that surrounds contemplative practitioners during profound states of awareness. Take a moment to consider what this might mean for your own experience. Have you ever had moments during deep contemplation, prayer, or meditation when the usual sense of being a separate individual seemed to fade? Times when you felt connected to something vast and timeless that seemed to include everything? These experiences, which contemplatives throughout history have described as touching the divine or cosmic consciousness, might represent natural expressions of how awareness functions at its deepest levels. But here's where the mystery extends into even more fascinating territory. Some researchers propose, though this remains highly speculative, that consciousness might operate through field-like processes that transcend not just spatial boundaries, but temporal ones as well. If information can exist in quantum-like states that don't follow classical rules about cause and effect, then coherent consciousness might participate in patterns that extend backward and forward through time. This interpretation draws on some of the most puzzling discoveries in quantum physics, where particles can appear to influence each other instantaneously across vast distances, and where the act of measurement seems to affect not just present states but even past configurations. While no one suggests that human consciousness operates through quantum entanglement in any direct way, The mathematical frameworks that describe quantum systems have proven surprisingly useful for modeling certain aspects of how information might flow through conscious networks. Consider the mystery of precognitive experiences, those moments when people report knowing something before it happens through conventional channels. While mainstream science remains skeptical of such phenomena, studies of contemplative practitioners reveal intriguing patterns. During deep meditative states, some individuals show physiological responses to future stimuli before those stimuli are presented, as if their nervous systems were somehow sampling information from upcoming events. These findings remain controversial and lack scientific consensus, but they point toward the possibility that consciousness during transcendent states might access information through channels that don't follow ordinary temporal sequences. It's as if profound contemplative awareness opens windows into the deeper structure of time itself, revealing that past, present, and future might be more interconnected than our ordinary experience suggests. The implications become even more fascinating when we consider what happens to memory during these transcendent states. Rather than accessing personal memories in the usual sequential way, contemplatives often report experiencing what they describe as eternal moments, where all of time seems present simultaneously. These aren't just subjective feelings, but appear to involve fundamental changes in how the brain processes temporal information. Neuroscientists studying contemplative states have found that the hippocampus, which normally organizes memories in chronological sequences, shows dramatically altered patterns of activity during profound meditative experiences. Instead of the usual linear processing, memories seem to become accessible through associative networks that transcend temporal boundaries. It's as if consciousness gains access to a kind of eternal present where all experiences exist simultaneously. This research connects to some of the deepest questions in physics about the nature of time itself. Einstein's theories revealed that time is relative, flowing differently depending on motion and gravity. But quantum mechanics suggests something even more radical, that time might not be fundamental at all, but rather an emergent property of deeper processes that operate outside temporal constraints. Some interpretations of quantum mechanics propose that all possible moments exist simultaneously in what physicists call the block universe, where past, present, and future are equally real. If consciousness can access information through quantum-like processes, then transcendent states might represent moments when awareness touches this timeless dimension, experiencing reality from a perspective that transcends the sequential flow of ordinary time. While these ideas remain highly speculative and far from scientific consensus, they offer a framework for understanding why contemplative traditions have consistently described enlightenment as a recognition that transcends time. The mystical insight that all is one might reflect actual patterns of information access that become available when consciousness achieves sufficient coherence to transcend its usual temporal constraints. As you reflect on these possibilities, notice how they might relate to your own experience of time during profound contemplative states. Have you ever had moments when time seemed to stop or expand infinitely? Periods during meditation or prayer when hours felt like minutes, or when a brief moment seemed to contain eternity? These experiences might be glimpses into the deeper temporal structure of consciousness itself. The practical implications of this research extend into questions about how contemplative practices might be cultivating capacities that go beyond stress reduction or emotional regulation. If coherent consciousness can access information through channels that transcend ordinary temporal boundaries. Then meditation, prayer, and other contemplative disciplines might be developing what we could call temporal intelligence, the capacity to navigate reality from perspectives that aren't confined to sequential moments. This doesn't mean that contemplative practitioners can predict the future or change the past through mental effort. Rather, it suggests that profound states of awareness might provide access to information and insights that emerge from the deeper temporal structure of existence itself. The wisdom that arises during contemplative practice might be drawing from sources that transcend the usual limitations of personal memory and sequential reasoning. Consider how this might appear in your own contemplative experience. The insights that arise during meditation often have a quality of timeless truth that seems to come from beyond personal knowledge. Creative breakthroughs frequently emerge during contemplative states, received rather than generated. These experiences might reflect the natural capacity of coherent consciousness to access information through channels that operate outside ordinary temporal constraints. The research on contemplative practice and temporal perception continues to evolve in fascinating directions. Studies of advanced practitioners reveal remarkable abilities to maintain present moment awareness for extended periods, as if they've learned to inhabit time differently than ordinary consciousness allows. Brain imaging during these states shows sustained patterns of neural coherence that some researchers describe as approaching a kind of temporal stability, where consciousness becomes less reactive to the usual fluctuations of mental and emotional experience. Some interpretations suggest that this temporal stability might represent a fundamental feature of consciousness at its deepest levels. If awareness itself exists outside the sequential flow of time, then contemplative practices might be gradually removing the conditioning that normally confines consciousness to temporal boundaries. The result would be access to what mystics have called eternal awareness, not consciousness that lasts forever, but consciousness that exists outside the framework of temporal duration altogether. This perspective finds support in the reported experiences of contemplatives throughout history, who consistently describe enlightenment as a recognition that transcends time. Whether in Buddhist descriptions of Buddha nature, Christian mystical accounts of eternal life, or the timeless self described in Hindu contemplative traditions, the deepest realizations seem to involve touching something that exists beyond temporal limitations. While we must be careful not to confuse subjective spiritual experiences with objective scientific facts, the convergence between contemplative reports and emerging research on consciousness and temporal perception suggests that these ancient insights might be pointing toward actual features of how awareness functions at its most fundamental levels. The implications extend into questions about the relationship between individual consciousness and larger patterns of intelligence that seem to transcend personal boundaries. If contemplative states can access information through channels that transcend time, they might also be touching into what some researchers cautiously term collective or universal aspects of consciousness that extend beyond individual minds. This remains highly speculative territory with no scientific consensus, but it offers a framework for understanding why contemplative practitioners often report insights and realizations that seem to come from beyond personal knowledge. The wisdom that emerges during profound contemplative states might be accessing information from what we could call cosmic consciousness, not a supernatural entity, but rather the deeper field-like processes through which individual awareness might participate in patterns of intelligence that transcend spatial and temporal boundaries. As we near the end of our exploration into the hidden dimension where emotions might secretly reshape reality, it's important to recognize that we've been traversing territory that exists at the very edges of human understanding. The connections between consciousness, emotion, quantum physics, and the nature of time itself represent some of the deepest mysteries that science and contemplative practice are only beginning to explore together. What emerges from this investigation is not a set of definitive answers, but rather an invitation to hold our understanding of consciousness and reality more lightly. The boundaries between inner and outer, between individual and collective, between past and future, might be far more permeable than our everyday experience suggests. Our emotions, rather than being merely private internal events, might be participating in patterns of influence and connection that extend through dimensions we're only beginning to understand. This doesn't mean that we can control reality through positive thinking or manipulate outcomes through emotional techniques. Rather, it suggests that consciousness itself might be more relational, more extended, and more participatory in the ongoing creation of reality than classical models would predict. Every moment of genuine presence, every cultivation of emotional coherence, every instance of touching into transcendent awareness might be contributing to patterns of development that extend far beyond personal boundaries. The practical wisdom that emerges is both simple and profound. To recognize that inner work naturally becomes outer service, that personal transformation participates in collective evolution, and that individual healing contributes to the healing of the world. This isn't a burden of responsibility, but rather a recognition of the deep interconnectedness that already exists, the ways in which consciousness is always participating in something greater than itself. As you integrate these ideas into your own understanding, remember that you don't need to grasp all the theoretical implications to work with these principles in daily life. Simply paying attention to how your emotional states affect your interactions with others can reveal the subtle ways in which consciousness extends beyond individual boundaries. Cultivating genuine gratitude, compassion, and inner peace becomes a natural expression of recognizing that awareness is inherently participatory in the ongoing creation of shared reality. The research continues to evolve, with scientists exploring ever more sophisticated ways of understanding how consciousness, emotion, and physical reality might be interconnected through mechanisms that transcend classical cause and effect. Whether these connections operate through electromagnetic fields, quantum information processes, or other channels that haven't yet been discovered, the invitation remains the same: to approach consciousness as something more mysterious, more extended, and more wonderful than our everyday assumptions might suggest. Perhaps most importantly, this exploration reminds us that the deepest questions about consciousness and reality aren't just intellectual puzzles to be solved, but invitations to transform our relationship to existence itself. When we recognize that our emotions might participate in the secret reshaping of reality, every feeling becomes both gift and responsibility. Every state of consciousness becomes both personal experience and collective contribution. The hidden dimension we've been exploring tonight isn't separate from ordinary life, but rather represents the deeper nature of every moment you experience. The electromagnetic fields generated by your heart, the quantum-like processes that might underlie emotional experience, the extended connections that link individual consciousness to collective patterns, All of these are present right now, humming quietly beneath the surface of whatever you're experiencing in this moment. The story of consciousness and reality becomes even more profound when we examine what happens at the intersection of ancient wisdom and modern technology. For thousands of years, healers and contemplatives have worked with something they called subtle energy, invisible influences that seem to flow between living beings and shape the conditions for health and well-being. Modern science once dismissed these ideas as primitive superstition, but recent developments in biofield research and energy medicine are revealing patterns that challenge our assumptions about the boundaries between consciousness, biology, and physical reality. Scientists using increasingly sophisticated instruments have begun measuring electromagnetic signatures around living organisms that behave in ways that classical physics struggles to explain. These biofields, as researchers cautiously term them, appear to carry information about the physiological and emotional state of the organism, creating measurable disturbances in the electromagnetic environment that extend beyond the physical body. While we must be clear that these are preliminary findings lacking scientific consensus, the patterns that emerge suggest that living systems might generate organized field effects that influence biological processes in subtle but measurable ways. The mechanism appears to involve what researchers call biophoton emission, the weak light that all living cells produce through metabolic processes. This isn't the kind of light you can see with your eyes, but rather coherent electromagnetic radiation that some interpretations suggest might serve as a communication channel between biological systems. When organisms are in states of health and vitality, these biophoton emissions show greater coherence and organization. During states of illness or stress, the patterns become more chaotic and disorganized. What makes this particularly fascinating from the perspective of consciousness research is that contemplative practices appear to influence these biophoton emission patterns in measurable ways. Studies of meditation practitioners reveal increased coherence in electromagnetic signatures during deep contemplative states, as if the organization of consciousness creates corresponding organization in the subtle energy fields that surround living systems. While this remains speculative territory that requires much more research, it offers a potential bridge between subjective contemplative experiences and objective physical measurements. Consider what this might mean for your own experience of presence and awareness. When you cultivate states of inner calm and coherence, you might be doing more than simply organizing your mental and emotional experience. Some interpretations suggest, though this remains unproven, that you might be contributing to patterns of electromagnetic organization that could theoretically influence the biological processes of other living systems in your environment. This doesn't mean you can heal others through positive thinking or manipulate outcomes through mental techniques, but rather that consciousness might participate in subtle information exchanges that operate below the threshold of ordinary awareness. The research extends into even more mysterious territories when we examine what happens during hands-on healing practices that have been used in various forms across cultures throughout history. Studies of therapeutic touch, Reiki, and similar modalities reveal interesting patterns in both practitioners and recipients that suggest something measurable might be occurring, even if the mechanisms remain completely unclear. Brain imaging of both healers and patients shows synchronized patterns of neural activity that emerge during treatment sessions, as if some form of nervous system communication were occurring through channels that transcend ordinary sensory interaction. Some researchers have measured changes in the electromagnetic environment around healing sessions, detecting organized field patterns that appear to correlate with reported therapeutic effects. While these findings are preliminary and lack scientific consensus, they point toward the possibility that consciousness might influence biological systems through subtle electromagnetic or informational channels that conventional medicine doesn't typically consider. This is speculative territory that requires much more investigation before any definitive conclusions can be drawn, but the accumulating evidence suggests that the boundaries between individual biological systems might be more permeable than classical models would predict. Take a moment to reflect on this possibility as it might appear in your own life. Have you ever noticed that certain people seem to have a calming or energizing effect on your physical well-being, even when they're not doing anything specific? Have you experienced moments when your presence seemed to have a soothing influence on pets, plants, or even the general atmosphere of spaces you inhabit? These everyday observations might be glimpses into subtle patterns of biofield interaction that operate through mechanisms we're only beginning to understand. The implications become even more intriguing when we consider how these biofield effects might connect to the epigenetic mechanisms we discussed earlier. If consciousness can influence electromagnetic field patterns, and if these fields can affect biological processes, then contemplative practices might be creating changes in gene expression through pathways that bypass the conventional nervous system entirely. Some researchers have proposed, though this remains highly speculative, that biofield interactions might represent a form of energetic communication that influences cellular processes directly, creating therapeutic effects through mechanisms that operate at the interface between consciousness and biology. This interpretation finds tentative support in studies of distance healing practices, where therapeutic intentions are directed toward recipients who are physically separated from the practitioner by significant distances. While mainstream science remains skeptical of such phenomena, carefully controlled studies have occasionally detected statistical correlations between healing intentions and measurable changes in recipient physiology, including improvements in immune function, wound healing rates, and stress hormone levels. These effects are typically small and difficult to replicate consistently, but their occasional appearance in rigorous experimental settings suggests that consciousness might influence biological systems through channels that transcend local physical interaction. The mechanism for such effects, if they exist, would necessarily involve some form of non-local information transfer that classical physics cannot easily explain. Some interpretations draw on quantum field theory to propose that consciousness might operate through information patterns that exist in the quantum vacuum, the seething sea of virtual particles and energy fluctuations that fills all of space. If coherent consciousness can organize these quantum field fluctuations in subtle ways, then focused intention might theoretically create information patterns that could influence biological processes at a distance. This remains purely speculative territory with no scientific consensus, but it offers a framework for understanding how the extended consciousness effects we've been discussing might operate through mechanisms that transcend ordinary electromagnetic interactions. The quantum vacuum represents a universal information medium that connects all points in space instantaneously, and if consciousness can interface with this medium through sufficiently coherent states, then the boundaries between local and non-local influence might be far more permeable than conventional physics suggests. As you contemplate these possibilities, notice how they might shift your understanding of the relationship between inner contemplative work and outer service to others. If consciousness can influence biological processes through subtle field interactions or quantum information channels, then your cultivation of inner coherence becomes not just personal development, but a contribution to the healing and well-being of the broader web of life. This doesn't create pressure to become a healer or to take responsibility for other people's health, but rather reveals the natural service dimension that emerges from authentic contemplative practice. The research on biofield interactions and consciousness-mediated healing continues to evolve, with scientists developing increasingly sophisticated ways of measuring and understanding these subtle influence patterns. New instruments capable of detecting extremely weak electromagnetic signals are revealing previously invisible aspects of biological communication, while advances in quantum field theory are providing mathematical frameworks that might eventually explain how consciousness could influence physical processes through non-local mechanisms. One of the most promising areas of investigation involves what researchers call coherent energy medicine, therapeutic approaches that work with the electromagnetic and informational aspects of biological systems, rather than focusing exclusively on biochemical interventions. These modalities, which include various forms of biofeedback, frequency therapy, and electromagnetic field treatments, are based on the premise that health and illness involve patterns of energetic organization that can be influenced through appropriate informational inputs. While conventional medicine remains focused primarily on pharmaceutical and surgical interventions, a growing number of healthcare practitioners are beginning to explore how consciousness-based approaches might complement traditional treatments. Studies of meditation, prayer, and other contemplative practices consistently show measurable improvements in immune function, cardiovascular health, and stress-related disorders, suggesting that consciousness-mediated healing effects might represent a valuable resource for integrative healthcare approaches. The practical implications of this research extend into questions about how we might cultivate greater sensitivity to the subtle informational dimensions of health and healing. If biological systems communicate through electromagnetic and quantum informational channels, then developing greater awareness of these subtle influence patterns might enhance our capacity to support healing processes in ourselves and others. This doesn't mean abandoning conventional medical care or believing that consciousness alone can cure serious illnesses, but rather recognizing that healing might involve informational and energetic dimensions that complement biochemical and surgical interventions. Consider how this understanding might influence your approach to your own health and well-being. Rather than viewing your body as a purely mechanical system that requires external fixes when problems arise, you might begin to recognize that your consciousness is continuously participating in the organization of your biological processes, the quality of your attention, the coherence of your emotional states, and the depth of your contemplative practice might all be contributing to patterns of information flow that support or compromise your physiological functioning. This perspective finds support in the rapidly growing field of psychoneuroimmunology, which studies how psychological states influence immune system functioning. Decades of research have established clear connections between chronic stress and increased susceptibility to illness, while practices that cultivate emotional coherence and stress resilience show consistent benefits for immune function. The mechanism appears to involve complex cascades of hormonal and neurochemical changes that directly affect the activity of immune cells. But some researchers propose that biofield interactions might also play a role in these consciousness-mediated health effects. The The implications extend beyond individual health into questions about collective healing and social coherence. If consciousness can influence biological processes through field-like mechanisms, then group contemplative practices might create collective biofield effects that support the health and well-being of entire communities. This is speculative territory that lacks scientific consensus, but some studies of group meditation practices have detected correlations with reduced violence and improved social cohesion in surrounding areas, though these findings remain controversial and require further investigation. The potential mechanism might involve what some researchers call social biofields, collective electromagnetic patterns that emerge from groups of individuals engaged in synchronized contemplative practices. While this remains purely theoretical, it offers a framework for understanding how individual consciousness development might contribute to collective healing processes that extend beyond personal boundaries. Your cultivation of inner coherence might be participating in patterns of influence that support the health and harmony of your family, community, and broader social systems. As we explore these possibilities, it's crucial to maintain appropriate humility about the limits of current scientific understanding. The biofield research we've been discussing represents emerging science that challenges conventional paradigms, and many of the interpretations we've considered remain speculative hypotheses rather than established facts. The mechanisms through which consciousness might influence biological processes are not well understood, and claims about healing effects must be evaluated carefully against rigorous experimental evidence. Yet the accumulating research on consciousness, electromagnetic fields, and biological systems suggests that we might be approaching a revolution in our understanding of health, healing, and the relationship between mind and body. The boundaries between subjective experience and objective biology, between individual consciousness and collective well-being, between local and non-local influence, might be far more permeable than classical models predict. This emerging understanding invites us to hold our assumptions about consciousness and reality more lightly, to remain open to possibilities that transcend conventional categories while maintaining critical discernment about extraordinary claims. The biofield effects we've been discussing might represent natural expressions of how consciousness functions at levels we're only beginning to explore, or they might be artifacts of measurement error and wishful thinking. The truth likely lies somewhere between these extremes, in territories that require both rigorous scientific investigation and openness to phenomena that challenge established paradigms. What remains clear is that consciousness appears to be far more than a passive observer of biological processes. Whether through well-established psychoneuroimmunological pathways or through more speculative biofield interactions, our mental and emotional states continuously influence our physical health in ways that demonstrate the profound interconnectedness of mind and body. This understanding doesn't diminish the importance of conventional medical care, but rather reveals additional dimensions of healing that might complement and enhance traditional therapeutic approaches. The research on consciousness and healing points toward a future where medicine might integrate both biochemical interventions and consciousness-based approaches, recognizing that health and illness involve complex interactions between physical, informational, and perhaps even quantum-level processes. Such an integrative approach would honor both the precision of modern medical science and the wisdom of contemplative traditions that have long recognized the healing potential of coherent consciousness. As you integrate these ideas into your own understanding of health and healing, remember that you don't need to grasp all the theoretical mechanisms to work with these principles in practical ways. Simply paying attention to how your mental and emotional states affect your physical well-being can reveal the intimate connections between consciousness and biology that operate in your own experience. Cultivating practices that promote inner coherence, whether through meditation, prayer, contemplative movement, or other approaches that resonate with you, becomes not just spiritual development, but potentially a form of preventive medicine that supports your biological functioning at multiple levels simultaneously. The implications of this research extend into profound questions about the nature of consciousness itself and its relationship to the physical universe. If awareness can influence biological processes through subtle field interactions, and if these effects can transcend local physical boundaries, then consciousness might be far more fundamental to the structure of reality than conventional neuroscience suggests. Rather than emerging from complex neural networks as an epiphenomenon of brain activity, consciousness might be a basic feature of the universe that participates directly in the organization of matter and energy at multiple scales. This perspective finds tentative support in theories of quantum consciousness that propose awareness operates through quantum field processes that transcend the boundaries of individual brains. While these ideas remain highly speculative and lack scientific consensus, they offer frameworks for understanding how consciousness might interface with the fundamental structures of reality in ways that allow for the kind of non-local influence effects we've been discussing. The practical wisdom that emerges from this exploration is both simple and revolutionary. To recognize that consciousness is not separate from the physical world, but rather participates intimately in the ongoing organization of biological and perhaps even physical processes. Your inner work becomes outer healing. Your contemplative practice becomes a contribution to collective well-being, and your cultivation of coherent awareness becomes a form of service to the larger web of life of which you are an inseparable part. The boundaries between healer and patient, between individual and collective, between consciousness and cosmos, begin to reveal themselves as useful distinctions rather than absolute separations. In the emerging understanding of biofield interactions and consciousness-mediated healing, every moment of genuine presence becomes a gift to the world. Every cultivation of inner coherence contributes to patterns of healing that extend far beyond personal boundaries, and every contemplative practice participates in the evolution of consciousness itself. As our exploration of the hidden dimension, where emotions reshape reality, draws toward its conclusion, we find ourselves at the threshold of even deeper mysteries about the nature of existence itself. The biofield interactions we've been discussing connect to fundamental questions about the relationship between consciousness, information, and the structure of space-time itself. If awareness can influence biological processes through subtle field effects that transcend local physical boundaries, what might this suggest about the deeper architecture of reality? These questions naturally lead us towards some of the most fascinating territories in modern physics, where the nature of time itself becomes a central mystery. The same quantum principles that suggest consciousness might participate in biofield interactions also point toward possibilities that could revolutionize our understanding of temporal existence. If information can be shared instantaneously between quantum-entangled particles regardless of spatial separation, and if consciousness might access information through quantum-like processes, then what barriers might prevent awareness from transcending not just spatial boundaries, but temporal ones as well? The research on consciousness and time perception reveals remarkable patterns during transcendent contemplative states, where practitioners report experiences that seem to transcend ordinary temporal flow. Brain imaging during these states shows fundamental changes in how the nervous system processes temporal information, as if consciousness were accessing dimensions of time that remain hidden during ordinary waking awareness. These findings connect to some of the deepest questions in physics about whether time travel might be possible, not just as a theoretical possibility, but as a fundamental feature of how consciousness navigates the deeper structures of existence. If you found yourself intrigued by the possibility that consciousness might influence reality through biofield interactions and extended awareness processes, you might find yourself equally fascinated by the question of whether awareness itself might transcend our ordinary experience of time's relentless forward flow. The journey into temporal mysteries takes us even deeper into territories where science and consciousness meet, revealing possibilities so profound they challenge everything we thought we knew about causation, free will, and the ultimate nature of existence itself. The exploration of consciousness and time opens doorways to understanding that could transform not just how we think about the universe, but how we experience our own existence within it. Is time travel possible? In our universe, what they're not telling you ventures into territory so vast and strange that they might forever change your relationship to the mystery of being conscious in a cosmos that grows more wonderful and enigmatic with every question we dare to ask. The questions that emerge from this exploration take us into territories so profound they challenge the very foundations of scientific materialism. If consciousness can influence biological processes through subtle field interactions, and if these effects transcend local physical boundaries, then we might be approaching a fundamental revision of how we understand the relationship between mind and reality. Some researchers propose, though this remains highly speculative, that these phenomena point toward a universe where information itself might be more fundamental than matter or energy. Consider what this possibility might mean for your understanding of your own existence. Rather than being an isolated biological system generating consciousness as an emergent property of neural complexity, you might be participating in patterns of information processing that extend through dimensions we're only beginning to map. Your thoughts, emotions, and contemplative states might be interfacing with information structures that transcend the boundaries of individual brains, connecting you to what some interpretations cautiously describe as cosmic or universal intelligence. This perspective finds tentative support in research on what scientists call non-local consciousness effects, though we must emphasize that these remain controversial findings that lack scientific consensus. Studies of twins and close family members have occasionally detected statistical correlations in physiological responses that occur simultaneously despite physical separation. Some interpretations suggest these might represent evidence for consciousness operating through channels that transcend ordinary space and time, though conventional explanations involving shared genetics and environmental factors remain more widely accepted. The mechanism for such effects, if they exist, would necessarily involve information transfer through pathways that classical physics cannot easily explain. Some theoretical frameworks propose that consciousness might interface with what physicists call the quantum vacuum, the seething field of virtual particles and energy fluctuations that fills all of space. If coherent awareness can organize these quantum field fluctuations in subtle ways, then individual consciousness might participate in information networks that extend throughout the cosmos. Take a moment to let this possibility settle in your awareness. As you listen right now, your consciousness might be participating in information exchanges that connect you to patterns of intelligence operating at scales from the quantum to the cosmic. This isn't science fiction or wishful thinking, but a speculative interpretation of emerging research that suggests consciousness might be far more extended and relational than our everyday experience reveals. The practical implications of this understanding extend into questions about the ultimate purpose and meaning of contemplative practice. If individual consciousness development contributes to larger patterns of cosmic intelligence, then your inner work becomes participation in something that could be described as the universe awakening to itself. Every moment of genuine presence, every cultivation of wisdom and compassion, every instance of touching transcendent awareness might be contributing to the evolution of consciousness on a universal scale. This interpretation connects to ancient wisdom traditions that have long described enlightenment as recognizing one's essential unity with cosmic consciousness. What modern science might be discovering through Biofield research, quantum consciousness studies, and investigations of non-local information transfer is that these mystical insights could reflect actual features of how awareness operates at its deepest levels. The boundaries between individual and universal consciousness might be conceptual constructions rather than absolute realities. Yet even as we explore these extraordinary possibilities, it remains crucial to ground them in practical wisdom that enhances rather than escapes from ordinary human experience. The most profound contemplative realizations ultimately express themselves through greater presence, deeper compassion, and more skillful engagement with the challenges and opportunities of daily life. Whether consciousness operates through local neural networks or cosmic information fields, the invitation remains the same: to cultivate awareness that serves both personal flourishing and collective well-being. The research on extended consciousness effects continues to evolve through multiple scientific disciplines, each contributing pieces to a puzzle that might eventually reveal the deeper nature of awareness itself. Neuroscientists study the neural correlates of transcendent experiences, finding consistent patterns of whole brain coherence during profound contemplative states. Physicists explore quantum theories of consciousness that might explain how awareness could transcend spatial and temporal boundaries. Biologists investigate field effects in living systems that suggest organisms might communicate through subtle electromagnetic and informational channels. While no single discipline has produced definitive answers, the convergence of findings across multiple fields points toward a recognition that consciousness might be far more fundamental to the structure of reality than conventional materialist paradigms suggest. Rather than being a late evolutionary development that emerged from unconscious matter, awareness might be a basic feature of the universe that expresses itself through increasingly complex forms as cosmic evolution unfolds. This perspective invites a profound shift in how we understand our place in the cosmos. Instead of being isolated observers in a fundamentally unconscious universe, we might be localized expressions of cosmic consciousness, temporary focal points through which the universe experiences and understands itself. Our contemplative practices become forms of cosmic service. Our emotional healing contributes to universal healing processes, and our individual awakening participates in the awakening of existence itself. The implications extend into questions about the ultimate trajectory of human consciousness development. If individual awareness can transcend ordinary spatial and temporal boundaries through sufficiently coherent, contemplative states, then what might be possible as our species continues to evolve? Some interpretations suggest, though this remains pure speculation, that we might be approaching a collective transformation in which human consciousness begins to operate more fully through these extended field processes. Such a transformation wouldn't involve losing individual identity or merging into some undifferentiated cosmic consciousness, but rather recognizing the deeper unity that already exists while maintaining the diversity of individual perspectives and experiences. It would be like an orchestra discovering that all the instruments have been playing the same symphony from different parts, each contribution essential to the whole, while maintaining its unique voice and character. As you contemplate these possibilities, notice how they might already be appearing in your own experience. Have you had moments during deep contemplation when the usual sense of being a separate individual seemed to fade, revealing a sense of connection to something vast and encompassing? Times when insights or creative inspirations seemed to arise from beyond personal knowledge, experiences of profound peace or love that felt like touching into the very fabric of existence itself. These glimpses might be natural expressions of consciousness operating through its extended dimensions, moments when your individual awareness touches into the deeper field processes through which all consciousness might be interconnected. They don't require special abilities or extraordinary spiritual development, but rather represent the natural capacity of coherent awareness to recognize its own deeper nature. The research on consciousness and reality continues to unfold in directions that might eventually bridge the ancient divide between scientific materialism and contemplative wisdom. Whether through quantum field theories, biofield investigations, or studies of non-local information transfer, science appears to be approaching recognition that consciousness might be as fundamental to the universe as space, time, matter, and energy. This doesn't mean abandoning scientific rigor or embracing supernatural explanations for natural phenomena. Rather, it suggests expanding our scientific understanding to include consciousness as a basic feature of reality that participates directly in the organization and evolution of cosmic structure. Such an expansion would honor both the precision of empirical investigation and the insights that have long recognized awareness of contemplative traditions as the deepest dimension of existence. The practical wisdom that emerges from this exploration is both humbling and inspiring. It invites us to approach consciousness development not as personal achievement or individual spiritual advancement, but as participation in something far greater than ourselves. Every contemplative practice becomes a form of cosmic service. Every moment of genuine presence contributes to universal awakening, and every cultivation of wisdom and compassion participates in the ongoing evolution of existence itself. This understanding doesn't diminish the importance of addressing personal psychological healing, developing emotional maturity, or engaging skillfully with practical challenges. Rather, it reveals that these apparently individual processes are actually expressions of cosmic healing, universal development, and the universe's ongoing exploration of new possibilities through conscious beings like ourselves. The boundaries between personal and transpersonal, between individual and cosmic, between healing and awakening, begin to reveal themselves as useful distinctions rather than absolute separations. In recognizing consciousness as potentially fundamental to reality itself, every aspect of human experience becomes sacred. Every moment of awareness becomes participation in cosmic process, and every sincere effort toward greater wisdom and compassion becomes a gift to the universe's ongoing journey of self-discovery. As we approach the conclusion of our exploration into the hidden dimension where emotions might secretly reshape reality, we find ourselves transformed by the journey itself. The questions we began with have opened into even deeper mysteries about the nature of consciousness, the structure of reality, and our own participation in cosmic processes that extend far beyond what conventional science has typically considered. We've discovered that emotions might operate through electromagnetic field processes that extend beyond individual boundaries, influencing the biological and psychological states of others through subtle resonance effects. We've explored how contemplative practices might enhance these field interactions, creating coherent patterns of influence that contribute to collective healing and social harmony. We've examined research suggesting that consciousness might access information through channels that transcend ordinary spatial and temporal constraints, opening possibilities for non-local awareness effects that challenge classical assumptions about the boundaries of individual minds. Throughout this exploration, we've maintained appropriate humility about the limits of current scientific understanding, while remaining open to possibilities that might expand our conception of what consciousness can be and do. Many of the ideas we've discussed remain speculative interpretations rather than established facts, requiring much more research before definitive conclusions can be drawn. Yet the accumulating evidence from multiple scientific disciplines suggests that consciousness might be far more extended, relational, and fundamental than conventional materialist paradigms predict. The practical implications of this research invite us to approach our own contemplative development with a deeper sense of its potential significance. Rather than viewing meditation, prayer, or other consciousness practices as merely personal stress reduction techniques or individual spiritual pursuits, we can recognize them as potentially contributing to larger patterns of healing, awakening, and evolution that extend throughout the cosmos. This doesn't create pressure to become perfect or to take responsibility for universal transformation. Rather, it reveals that the sincere cultivation of presence, compassion, and wisdom naturally serves something far greater than personal benefit. Your inner work becomes outer service, your healing participates in collective healing, and your awakening contributes to cosmic awakening, not through effort or intention, but through the inherent interconnectedness of consciousness itself. As you integrate these ideas into your own understanding and practice, remember that you don't need to grasp all the theoretical implications to work with these principles experientially. Simply paying attention to how your emotional and contemplative states affect your interactions with others can reveal the subtle ways in which consciousness extends beyond individual boundaries. Cultivating genuine presence, gratitude, and compassion becomes a natural expression of recognizing that awareness is inherently participatory in the ongoing creation of shared reality. The research continues to evolve in directions that might eventually provide clearer understanding of the mechanisms through which consciousness influences biological processes, social dynamics, and perhaps even the fundamental structures of physical reality. Whether these effects operate through electromagnetic fields, quantum information processes, morphic resonance, or other channels that haven't yet been discovered, the invitation remains constant to approach consciousness as something far more mysterious, extended, and wonderful than our everyday assumptions typically suggest. Perhaps most importantly, this exploration reveals that the deepest questions about consciousness and reality aren't merely intellectual puzzles to be solved, but invitations to transform our relationship to existence itself. When we recognize that emotions' reshaping of reality through might participate in the secret extended field processes, every feeling becomes both gift and responsibility. Every contemplative moment becomes both personal experience and cosmic contribution. The hidden dimension we've explored together exists not in some distant realm, but right here in the subtle interactions between your awareness and the world around you. The electromagnetic fields generated by your heart, the quantum-like processes that might underlie emotional experience, the extended connections that potentially link individual consciousness to universal patterns. All of these are present in this very moment, humming quietly beneath the surface of whatever you're experiencing right now. As you continue your own exploration of these mysteries, whether through contemplative practice, scientific study, or simply paying closer attention to the subtle dimensions of daily experience, remember that consciousness research has revealed something truly extraordinary. You are not a separate observer in a fundamentally unconscious universe, but rather a unique expression of cosmic awareness, a temporary focal point through which the universe experiences and understands itself. This recognition doesn't diminish your individuality or dissolve your personal boundaries, but rather reveals the deeper context within which individual experience unfolds. You remain uniquely yourself while participating in something immeasurably larger, like a wave that maintains its distinct form while being inseparably part of the ocean that gives it existence. The questions that have guided our journey together naturally open into even more profound mysteries about the relationship between consciousness and the fundamental structure of space-time itself. If awareness can transcend spatial boundaries through field-like processes, and if coherent consciousness might access information outside ordinary causal sequences, then what might this suggest about the nature of time itself? These temporal mysteries lead us towards some of the most fascinating territories where modern physics meets contemplative wisdom, where the possibility of transcending linear time progression might represent not science fiction fantasy, but actual features of how consciousness navigates the deeper architecture of existence. The same quantum principles that suggest emotions might reshape reality also point toward possibilities that could revolutionize our understanding of temporal experience itself. Consider this remarkable discovery from recent studies of synchronized group activities. When people engage together in practices that cultivate emotional coherence, such as group meditation, synchronized breathing exercises, or even collective musical performances, researchers have detected something extraordinary happening at the physiological level. Heart rate variability patterns begin to synchronize across participants, creating what scientists term group coherence that can be measured with precision instruments. Brainwave patterns show similar synchronization, particularly in regions associated with empathy, emotional regulation, and social awareness. Take a breath here and imagine what this might mean for your own experience of being part of groups, whether in your workplace, family gatherings, or community activities. Have you noticed how certain group environments seem to naturally foster cooperation and understanding, while others feel fragmented or tense, even when everyone involved has good intentions? These everyday observations might be glimpses into the subtle biological processes through which individual emotional states create collective emotional climates that either support or undermine group harmony. The mechanism appears to involve what researchers cautiously call physiological entrainment, where individual nervous systems begin to resonate with coherent patterns generated by others in the group. This isn't conscious mimicry or deliberate synchronization, but rather appears to be an automatic biological response that operates below the threshold of awareness. When one person achieves a state of genuine emotional coherence, characterized by organized heart rhythms and integrated brain activity, others nearby often begin unconsciously aligning with these patterns, their own physiology gradually shifting toward greater coherence and stability. What makes this particularly fascinating from the perspective of social evolution is that these entrainment effects appear to enhance cognitive functions that are crucial for effective group cooperation. Studies show that when groups achieve physiological coherence, individual participants demonstrate improved creative problem-solving abilities, enhanced empathetic accuracy in reading others' emotional states, and increased capacity for what researchers term collective intelligence, where group insights exceed the capabilities of any individual member working alone. This suggests, though much more research is needed, that human beings might possess biological mechanisms specifically evolved to support collective wisdom and cooperation through shared emotional coherence. Rather than being isolated individuals who must overcome our separateness through effort and intention, we might be inherently designed to function as coherent collective organisms when conditions support the natural synchronization of our emotional and physiological states. The implications extend into profound questions about the future of human social organization. If group coherence enhances both individual well-being and collective intelligence, then practices that cultivate shared emotional states might represent essential technologies for addressing the complex challenges facing our species. Climate change, economic inequality, social fragmentation, and political polarization all require forms of cooperation that transcend individual self-interest and narrow group loyalties, demanding the kind of collective wisdom that appears to emerge naturally from physiologically coherent groups. Some interpretations suggest, though this remains highly speculative, that these group coherence effects might operate through the electromagnetic field interactions we discussed earlier in our exploration. When individuals achieve emotional coherence, their heart-generated electromagnetic fields become more organized and coherent, potentially creating collective field patterns that influence the electromagnetic environment shared by the entire group. While this interpretation lacks scientific consensus, it offers a framework for understanding how individual inner work might contribute directly to collective harmony and effectiveness. As you reflect on this possibility, notice how it might shift your understanding of your own role in the groups and communities you're part of. Rather than viewing your emotional state as a purely private matter, you might begin to recognize that your cultivation of inner coherence naturally becomes a gift to every collective situation you enter. This doesn't create pressure to maintain perfect emotional states, but rather reveals the natural service dimension that emerges from authentic contemplative practice and emotional maturity. The research on group coherence connects to fascinating studies of what scientists call social contagion in emotional states. Emotions appear to spread through social networks with remarkable efficiency, often operating through channels that transcend verbal communication or conscious interaction. When one person in a social system experiences a significant shift toward greater emotional stability or distress, others connected to that person often show corresponding changes in their own emotional patterns, even when they have no direct knowledge of the original person's state. The mechanism might involve multiple pathways, including subtle changes in facial expressions, vocal tones, posture, and breathing patterns that others unconsciously detect and mirror. But some researchers propose that electromagnetic field effects might also play a role, with coherent emotional states generating organized field patterns that influence the nervous systems of others through direct biofield interactions. While this interpretation remains unproven, it suggests that emotional influence between people might operate through channels that are more direct and immediate than conventional models of social interaction would predict. This understanding has profound implications for leadership, education, healthcare, and social change efforts. If emotional states spread through groups via both conscious and unconscious channels, then individuals who cultivate genuine emotional coherence naturally become sources of stability and wisdom that benefit entire social systems. This isn't about manipulating others or projecting artificial positivity, but rather about recognizing that authentic inner development creates ripple effects that extend far beyond personal boundaries. Consider how this principle might already be operating in your own life. Think about people you know who seem to have a naturally calming or inspiring influence on groups, even when they're not actively trying to lead or influence others. These individuals often share certain qualities: genuine presence, emotional stability, and the capacity to remain centered during challenging situations. From the perspective of coherence research, their influence might operate through the natural tendency of nervous systems to synchronize with coherent patterns, creating group states that support everyone's optimal functioning. The practical applications of this research extend into innovative approaches to education, where teachers are beginning to explore how classroom coherence affects learning outcomes. Studies show that when educators cultivate their own emotional coherence and create classroom environments that support student emotional regulation, academic performance improves significantly, along with reduced behavioral problems and enhanced social cooperation among students. The mechanism appears to involve the natural tendency of young nervous systems to entrain with coherent adult patterns, creating optimal conditions for learning and development. Similar principles are being explored in healthcare settings, where the emotional coherence of medical staff appears to influence patient outcomes in measurable ways. While the mechanisms remain unclear and much more research is needed, some studies suggest that healthcare providers who maintain coherent emotional states during patient interactions contribute to healing environments that support recovery processes beyond the effects of medical treatments alone. This doesn't replace conventional medical care, but rather reveals additional dimensions of therapeutic influence that complement technical interventions. Take a moment to imagine what these discoveries might mean for the future of human social evolution. If practices that cultivate group coherence can enhance collective intelligence, improve cooperation, and support both individual and collective well-being, then such practices might represent essential skills for navigating the increasing complexity of modern civilization. Rather than viewing contemplative practices as individual spiritual pursuits or stress reduction techniques, we might recognize them as fundamental technologies for social harmony and collective wisdom. The research extends into investigations of what happens during large-scale synchronized activities, such as mass meditation events, religious gatherings, or cultural celebrations where thousands of people participate in shared practices. While the data remains preliminary and controversial, some studies have detected statistical correlations between such events and temporary reductions in violence, accidents, and social conflict in surrounding areas. These findings lack scientific consensus and require much more investigation, but they point toward the possibility that group coherence effects might scale up to influence broader social and even environmental patterns. The proposed mechanism involves what some researchers cautiously term field effects, generated by large numbers of people, achieving synchronized states of consciousness and emotional coherence. While this interpretation remains highly speculative, it suggests that collective contemplative practices might influence social dynamics through subtle channels that operate beyond the immediate participants. If such effects exist, they would represent a form of social healing that emerges naturally from the cultivation of individual and group coherence. This perspective finds tentative support in historical observations of how certain cultural practices seem to promote social stability and cooperation across generations. Traditional cultures often developed elaborate ceremonies, festivals, and contemplative practices that brought communities together in shared emotional experiences. While these practices were typically explained through religious or spiritual frameworks, they might have functioned as technologies for generating group coherence that supported social harmony and collective resilience. As you contemplate these possibilities, notice how they might influence your understanding of community participation and social responsibility. Rather than viewing your involvement in groups as separate from your contemplative practice, you might begin to recognize that every genuine moment of presence, every cultivation of emotional coherence, and every sincere effort toward greater wisdom and compassion naturally contributes to the collective wisdom and harmony of the human family. The implications extend into questions about the role of contemplative practices in addressing global challenges that require unprecedented levels of human cooperation. Climate change, pandemic response, economic inequality, and social fragmentation all demand forms of collective intelligence and coordination that transcend traditional political and cultural boundaries. If group coherence research is correct in suggesting that shared contemplative states enhance collective problem-solving abilities, then the widespread cultivation of such practices might be essential for our species' successful navigation of these challenges. This doesn't mean that meditation or other contemplative practices alone can solve complex social problems, but rather that they might provide crucial foundation conditions that support the kind of clear thinking, emotional stability, and cooperative capacity needed for effective collective action. The inner work becomes inseparable from outer service. Individual development becomes inherently connected to collective evolution, and personal contemplative practice becomes a form of social activism that operates through the most fundamental levels of human consciousness and biology. The research on group coherence also reveals fascinating patterns in how collective insights and creative breakthroughs emerge. Studies of scientific research teams, artistic collaboratives, and innovation groups show that breakthrough discoveries and creative solutions often arise during moments when group members achieve synchronized states of focused attention and emotional coherence. It's as if collective coherence creates conditions where insights can emerge that exceed the knowledge and capabilities of any individual participant. The mechanism might involve what some researchers describe as distributed cognition, where individual minds begin functioning as interconnected components of a larger cognitive system. When group members achieve emotional and attentional coherence, information processing appears to become shared across the group network, allowing for pattern recognition and creative synthesis that transcends individual cognitive limitations. While this remains a speculative interpretation, it offers a framework for understanding how group practices might enhance collective intelligence in practical and measurable ways. Consider how this understanding might transform approaches to collaborative work in your own life. Rather than viewing group projects as competitions between individual perspectives or negotiations between separate interests, you might approach them as opportunities to participate in collective intelligence processes that can access wisdom beyond what any individual could achieve alone. The key appears to be creating conditions that support emotional coherence and focused attention among all participants, allowing for the natural emergence of shared insights and creative solutions. The practical techniques for cultivating group coherence are surprisingly simple, though they require sincere commitment from participants. Beginning meetings or collaborative sessions with brief periods of synchronized breathing, shared moments of silence, or simple practices that help everyone become present and centered can significantly enhance group dynamics and outcomes. These aren't elaborate spiritual practices, but rather basic technologies for optimizing collective cognitive and emotional functioning. Research shows that groups that regularly engage in coherence-building practices develop enhanced capacity for navigating conflict constructively, making decisions that consider multiple perspectives, and maintaining focus on shared goals even during challenging circumstances. The practices appear to strengthen what researchers call group resilience, the ability of collective systems to maintain functioning and continue evolving even when facing significant stress or change. As you reflect on these ideas, notice how they might already be appearing in your experience of different groups and communities. Have you participated in meetings or gatherings where everyone seemed naturally aligned and cooperative, where good ideas flowed easily and decisions emerged naturally? Conversely, have you experienced groups where, despite everyone's good intentions, communication remained difficult and cooperation felt forced or artificial? These variations might reflect differences in the underlying coherence of group emotional and attentional states. The implications of group coherence research extend beyond human social systems into questions about our relationship with the broader ecological and planetary systems of which we are part. Some interpretations suggest, though this remains highly speculative, that the same principles governing coherence between individual nervous systems might operate at larger scales, influencing the relationships between human consciousness and environmental systems. This perspective finds tentative support in studies of people who spend significant time in natural environments, particularly those engaged in contemplative practices outdoors. Research shows that such individuals often develop enhanced sensitivity to environmental conditions, weather patterns, and ecological rhythms that appears to exceed what could be explained through conventional sensory channels alone. While the mechanisms remain completely unclear, some researchers proposed that coherent consciousness might interface with environmental information systems through subtle field interactions. The idea connects to indigenous wisdom traditions that have long recognized human consciousness as intimately connected to the intelligence of natural systems. From this perspective, The cultivation of inner coherence doesn't just benefit individual well-being and social harmony, but might also contribute to more harmonious relationships between human activities and ecological processes. While this interpretation lacks scientific consensus, it offers a framework for understanding how contemplative practices might support both personal development and environmental stewardship as interconnected aspects of a larger evolutionary process. Take a moment to consider how this possibility might appear in your own relationship with natural environments. Have you experienced moments during time spent in nature when you felt deeply connected to the rhythms and intelligence of ecological systems? Times when your presence in natural settings seemed to create a sense of mutual recognition and harmony between your consciousness and the living world around you. These experiences might reflect the natural capacity of coherent awareness to participate in the larger patterns of intelligence that organize ecological systems. The research on consciousness and environmental interaction remains at the very edges of scientific investigation, with findings that are preliminary and often controversial. Yet the accumulating evidence for various forms of field effects and non-local information transfer in biological systems suggests that the boundaries between individual consciousness, social systems, and environmental contexts might be more permeable than conventional models predict. Our contemplative practices might be participating in patterns of coherence that extend from the cellular level through social systems and potentially into the broader ecological networks that sustain life on Earth. This understanding invites a profound expansion of how we think about the purpose and significance of inner work. Rather than viewing contemplative practice as individual spiritual development or personal stress reduction, we might recognize it as participation in the larger evolutionary processes through which consciousness and life itself continue to develop greater complexity, intelligence, and harmony. Every moment of genuine presence becomes a contribution to cosmic evolution. Every cultivation of wisdom and compassion participates in the awakening of life itself. The practical implications are both humbling and inspiring. Rather than creating pressure to achieve special states or accomplish spiritual goals, this perspective reveals that sincere engagement with contemplative practice naturally serves something immeasurably larger than personal benefit. The inner work becomes inherently meaningful as participation in the ongoing evolution of consciousness, regardless of what experiences arise or what insights emerge during practice. As our exploration draws toward its conclusion, we find ourselves transformed by the journey itself. We began with questions about how emotions might secretly reshape reality, and we've discovered possibilities that extend far beyond what we initially imagined. The electromagnetic fields generated by emotional coherence, the group synchronization effects that enhance collective intelligence, the potential connections between consciousness and environmental systems all point toward a universe where awareness plays a far more active and creative role than conventional science has typically recognized. The boundaries between individual and collective, between personal and transpersonal, between human consciousness and cosmic intelligence begin to reveal themselves as useful distinctions rather than absolute separations. In recognizing that emotional coherence might participate in field-like processes that extend beyond personal boundaries, every feeling becomes both individual experience and contribution to collective patterns. Every contemplative practice becomes both personal development and social service. Every moment of genuine presence becomes both private awareness and participation in universal awakening. The research continues to evolve in directions that might eventually provide clearer understanding of the mechanisms through which consciousness influences biological processes, social dynamics, and perhaps even environmental systems. Whether these effects operate through electromagnetic fields, quantum information processes, morphic resonance, or channels that haven't yet been discovered, the invitation remains constant to approach consciousness as something far more mysterious, relational, and creative than our everyday assumptions typically suggest. Perhaps most importantly, this exploration reveals that the deepest questions about consciousness and intellectual puzzles to be solved, but reality aren't merely to transform our relationship to existence itself. When we recognize that emotions might participate in the secret reshaping of reality through extended field processes, every state of awareness becomes both personal experience and collective contribution. Every sincere effort toward greater coherence participates in the evolution of consciousness itself. The hidden dimension we've explored together exists not in some distant realm, but right here, where experience becomes participation in the evolution of consciousness, not in some distant realm, but right here, in the subtle interactions between your awareness and the world around you. The electromagnetic fields generated by your emotional states, the potential for group coherence to enhance collective intelligence, the possible connections between consciousness and environmental systems, all of these are present in this very moment, operating through mechanisms we're only beginning to understand, but can already begin to work with through sincere contemplative practice. As you continue your own exploration of these mysteries, whether through meditation, contemplative movement, time spent in nature, or simply paying closer attention to the subtle dimensions of social interaction, remember that the research has revealed something truly extraordinary. Consciousness appears to be far more relational, extended, and creative than conventional models suggest. You are not an isolated observer in a fundamentally unconscious universe, but rather a unique focal point of cosmic awareness, participating moment by moment in the ongoing evolution of intelligence and coherence throughout the cosmos. This recognition doesn't diminish your individuality or dissolve your personal boundaries, but rather reveals the deeper context within which individual experience unfolds. You remain uniquely yourself while participating in something immeasurably larger, like a note that maintains its distinct quality while contributing to a symphony that encompasses all possible music, all potential harmony, all creative possibility. The questions that have guided our journey together naturally open into even more profound mysteries about the relationship between consciousness and the fundamental structure of existence itself. If awareness can transcend spatial boundaries through field-like processes, and if coherent consciousness might access information outside usual sequences, then what might this suggest about the nature of time itself and our capacity to navigate temporal dimensions that remain hidden? These temporal, fascinating territories where modern physics meets contemplative wisdom, where the possibility of transcending linear time progression might represent not science fiction fantasy, but actual consciousness operates features of how freed from its usual constraints. The same when quantum principles that suggest emotions might reshape reality also point toward possibilities that could revolutionize our understanding of causation, free will, and the ultimate architecture of existence. Consider this remarkable observation from advanced contemplative practitioners. During states of profound meditative absorption, many report experiences that seem to transcend the ordinary flow of time entirely. Not just the subjective sense that time passes quickly during pleasant activities, but something far more mysterious. Moments when past, present, and future appear to exist simultaneously. When memories from childhood feel as immediate as current sensations. When insights about future possibilities arise with the same clarity as present awareness. Modern neuroscience has begun mapping what happens in the brain during these transcendent temporal experiences, revealing patterns that challenge our fundamental assumptions about how consciousness processes time. Brain imaging shows dramatic changes in the default mode network, the neural system that typically maintains our sense of moving through sequential moments as a continuing self. Instead of the usual linear processing, something more like a holographic pattern emerges, where information from different time periods becomes accessible through associative networks that transcend chronological boundaries. Take a breath here and reflect on whether you've ever touched something similar in your own contemplative experience. Perhaps during deep meditation, when the usual sense of duration seemed to dissolve, or moments in nature when you felt connected to something timeless that seemed to include all possible moments at once. These experiences might not be subjective illusions, but rather glimpses into how consciousness might naturally operate when freed from its habitual temporal constraints. The implications become even more fascinating when we examine what quantum physics reveals about the nature of time itself. Einstein's theories showed us that time is relative, flowing differently depending on motion and gravitational fields. But quantum mechanics suggests something even more radical, that time might not be fundamental at all, but rather an emergent property of deeper processes that operate outside temporal constraints altogether. Some interpretations of quantum mechanics propose what physicists call the block universe model, where all moments past, present, and future exist simultaneously in a four-dimensional space-time structure. From this perspective, our experience of moving through time might be somewhat like reading a book, where each page exists equally, but we encounter them in sequence. If consciousness can access information through quantum-like processes, as some researchers cautiously suggest, then profound contemplative states might represent moments when awareness touches this timeless dimension directly. This remains highly speculative territory with no scientific consensus, but it offers a framework for understanding why contemplative traditions throughout history have consistently described enlightenment as a recognition that transcends temporal boundaries. The mystical insight that all time is present now might reflect actual patterns of information access that become available when consciousness achieves sufficient coherence to transcend its usual sequential constraints. As you contemplate these possibilities, notice how they might relate to those moments in your own experience when time seemed to behave strangely. Perhaps during creative breakthroughs, when solutions appeared fully formed, as if received from some source outside linear thinking, or times when you knew something was about to happen before any conventional evidence suggested it, as if your awareness had briefly accessed information from future possibilities. These experiences connect to some of the most puzzling phenomena reported by contemplative practitioners across cultures and centuries. Advanced meditators sometimes describe what they call timeless awareness, states where the usual boundaries between moments dissolve, revealing what feels like eternal presence that encompasses all temporal experience simultaneously. While we must be careful not to confuse subjective spiritual experiences with objective scientific facts, the convergence between these reports and emerging research on consciousness and temporal perception suggests fascinating possibilities. The mechanism might involve what some researchers cautiously term quantum coherence in consciousness processes, though this remains purely speculative. If awareness operates through quantum-like phenomena during profound contemplative states, it might gain access to information patterns that exist outside the usual constraints of sequential causation. This wouldn't mean that consciousness can change the past or predict the future through mental effort, but rather that the boundaries between temporal dimensions might be more permeable than ordinary experience suggests. Consider what this could mean for your understanding of memory and anticipation. Rather than viewing memories as stored recordings of past events and future planning as projection based on past experience, these processes might involve consciousness accessing information that exists in what we could call the eternal present of quantum possibility. Your deepest insights and creative inspirations might be emerging from this timeless dimension where all potential experiences exist simultaneously. The research on temporal perception during contemplative states continues to reveal remarkable patterns. Advanced practitioners show that they can maintain studies of advanced present moment awareness for extraordinary durations, as if they've learned to inhabit time differently than ordinary consciousness allows. Brain imaging during these states reveals sustained patterns of neural coherence that some researchers describe as approaching a kind of temporal stability, where consciousness becomes less reactive to the usual fluctuations of mental and emotional experience. This temporal stability might represent a fundamental feature of awareness at its deepest levels. If consciousness itself exists outside the sequential flow of time, then contemplative practices might be gradually removing the conditioning that normally confines awareness to temporal boundaries. The result would be access to what mystics have called eternal consciousness. Not awareness that lasts forever, but consciousness that exists outside the framework of temporal duration altogether. Tonight we've journeyed together through the hidden dimension where emotions might secretly reshape reality, discovering that consciousness appears to be far more mysterious, relational, and participatory than we ever imagined. While much remains speculative and unproven, the emerging research suggests something profound. Your inner work naturally becomes outer service. Your emotional coherence contributes to collective harmony, and every moment of genuine presence participates in something immeasurably greater than personal experience. As you rest in these possibilities, remember that whether through electromagnetic fields or mechanisms we've yet to discover, you are not a separate observer, but a unique expression of cosmic awareness itself, quietly participating in the ongoing creation of shared reality through every breath, every feeling, every conscious moment. Sweet dreams, and thank you for exploring these mysteries with me. Thank you for exploring these mysteries with me.